It is time now for our Sunday group. Axios politics reporter Steph Kite, former Biden White House special assistant and director of message planning Megan Hayes, former chief of staff to Mitch McConnell and Ruthless podcast co-host Josh Holmes, and author and Project 21 chairman Horace Cooper. Welcome, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay, so there is new polling sort of trickling out, but we have our Fox News power rankings that we have every few weeks or so. This is what we have coming out this week. Former President Trump has lost his edge in Georgia and North Carolina in the latest power rankings, giving Vice President Harris a lead in the overall forecast for the first time, referring to the electoral count vote. But those are critical southern states. He's won them before.
Yeah.
He needs to win them this time.
Yeah, never lost North Carolina, and I'm less worried about North Carolina. It tends to come together pretty late, and for Republicans in the last 10 years, it's come together pretty decisively, and certainly with President Trump's name on the ballot, that's happened. Georgia's going to be tight, though, and Georgia is a state, obviously he had a big lead over Joe Biden when he was the Democratic nominee. That changed over an 8-week period when there was basically a coronation of Kamala Harris, but I think it's settled into much of what we expected a year ago at this time. It's going to be a nip and tuck race, and the entire thing, we're talking about 50, 60,000 votes over 6, 7 states. It's just going to be a very, very tight election.
Yeah, and so a lot of people were looking to the debate on Tuesday night, hoping they'd get more policy, more detail from both of them. You know, there's been some folks who are left wanting, and there are those who are debating the debate itself. Here are a couple headlines. National Review, Mirren Davis repeatedly fact-checked Trump, even sometimes when he was right, while never doing so to Harris. Over at The Federalist, they write, this made the debate effectively 3-on-1 against Trump and practically amounting to an in-kind donation to the Harris campaign. Megan, I'm guessing you saw it differently.
I mean, sure, if you want to blame the refs, go ahead and blame the refs. That's what people do in these types of things. But the fact of the matter is each of them had their moments of strength and had their moments of weakness. I think that what we're not seeing from either side enough is talking about the economy. They're focusing on their issues that play to their base and play to their parties. And that's great, and that's what these moments are for. But I think that the American people would be better off if we were talking about the economy and what they're each going to do. But I do think, you know, that the vice president did draw a contrast on character, which I do think is important when you start talking about these independent voters in these battleground states, because if they're not going to be deciding on policy, they're going to be deciding on character and what they want to look like for the next 4 years. Well,
and so I referenced this earlier with Governor Shapiro. Reuters did have their small little group there. They said this. They interviewed 10 people unsure how they were going to vote before the debate. 6 afterwards said now they would either vote for Trump or were leaning toward backing him. 3 said that they would back Harris. 1 was still unsure. And Horace, from there, they went on to say it was the economy. Even though they told Reuters, we don't like Trump, we were better off during him, during those years that he was president. So is it going to be about policy? Is it going to be about character? Is it a mix of the two?
This November, we're going to see something that our founders granted to us, the right of self-government. We're going to make one of the most consequential decisions. One of the challenges, as I see it from a polling perspective, is that people feel intimidated when it comes to answering questions. In 1982, we had what we call the Bradley effect. We're now seeing something very similar, I believe, almost like the woke mind virus. I saw Am I Racist this weekend here in the D.C. area. That movie highlights many of the DEI problems, but there is already a campaign to prevent it from being continued to be distributed. It becomes difficult for Americans to make a public decision or tell even an electronic system how they're going to vote when we're in this environment where your neighbors could condemn you because of your beliefs. So it's a threat, I see it, to this idea of self-government. But I think ultimately in the end, what we're going to see is far more Americans come out of the woodwork and say, I'm going to do what's in my best interest, and it is the economy, stupid.
Well, and Steph, that's what the Trump team will keep telling us, is that their internal polling is much different and much better than what we're seeing publicly. Is Horace right? I mean, do you think that there are these hidden voters that aren't comfortable talking about where they are? It was certainly true in 2016.
We've certainly seen that to be the case in the past. We do know that pollsters have shifted kind of the way that they poll voters to try to account for that. And the reality is you look at every single poll, and this is going to be a margin of error election. Everything is so close, not just at the top of the ticket, but you look at these Senate races, you look at House races, this is really going to come down to the wire. Everything is still, you know, you can say Harris is doing a little bit better in the polling, you know, lately. She has a little bit of a lead over Trump in some of these battleground states, but not enough to make the Harris team comfortable. And it's not enough to, you know, count count the Trump team out, and they're working hard. And Axios has reported that the Trump campaign feels like there are actually many voters who would vote for Trump, but maybe don't vote frequently. And they're really focusing their efforts on trying to turn out those Trump voters who maybe are not typical voters, who don't always turn out.
Yeah, and motivation and turnout is going to be critical for both of these, with the things being that tight. So let's talk about all of these lawsuits. I've talked about this with Governor Shapiro a bit, that are having to do with mail-in ballots and formalities and all kinds of things. Here, the GOP says it's about election integrity and making sure the votes are all properly counted. The critics say it's much more about trying to get mail-in ballots tossed because they're much more likely to vote dumb.
Well, I think that the case that you spoke specifically with Governor Shapiro about is a perfect example of how these left-wing outfits under voting rights, I guess, under the guise of voting rights, have just tried to make an absolute mess of the system. I mean, what the basis of that litigation was about is having two counties that just so happen to host Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, the two greatest Democrat-producing metros in the state, that you can send in any kind of ballot you want, regardless of breaking all the statutory rules of signing and dating and everything else, and they should be counted accordingly. The other counties, notwithstanding, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what you do statewide. Ultimately, that's why the state Supreme Court threw the whole thing out. But it's a microcosm of this larger argument that Democrats have been having in these states and localities about trying to get Democratic constituencies with basically unfettered providing of the votes, whether it's the full ballot harvesting issue, whether it is all of these other provisions to maximize a Democratic vote without really caring about the integrity of the process or the Republican vote at all. And so, yeah, this is a mess.
Well, and Megan, yeah, listen, there are all kinds of things that are legal, and every state is its own laboratory of democracy on how they count and handle their elections. But does that just signal that Republicans need to do more of the same? The ballot harvesting, the early voting, the mail-in balloting, where they've been critical of it in the past. There is a different message this time around, but will it work?
I mean, I think that everyone needs to work to get their folks to turn out in any way that they can, whether it be mail-in or in person. But I think that what's happening here is we're just trying to muddy the waters, and we're trying to just create uncertainty for people to believe that these votes aren't actually real. Not signing and dating your envelope that your ballot comes in is kind of silly. Like, that's a silly thing. I understand that's the law, so we need to follow the law. But at the end of the day, it was 8,000 votes that were tossed out in the primary. That's not going to decide the election in Pennsylvania writ large. But it's just muddying the waters, and it's just, on both sides, it's just muddying the waters. And I just think that we need to come to a universal system here of how we do this, and it would be beneficial for everyone to do that on all 50 states.
Yeah, I don't think the states are going to do it because we do have states that, you know, like Florida, that's a big state. There are millions of people there, and they get it done election night. There are others that are already warning us in advance. Like, don't count on us for 10 to 14 days because it may take a little bit longer. In the middle of all of this conversation about the mail-in ballots, we have this warning letter from the Association of State Elections Directors. These are people across counties and states all over the country, warning this letter to the Postmaster General that they don't think the mail system is up to par to handle all of this. They say elections officials have raised serious questions about processing facility operations, lost or delayed election mail, and frontline training deficiencies impacting the Postal Service's ability to deliver election mail in a timely and accurate manner. And Horace, they say, we've brought these things up to you guys repeatedly. We've seen no training, no help, no change. And by the way, the ballots are now going out.
Look, I agree with Josh. We're looking at this conversation where there's more of an interest in letting any kind of ballot come in and get counted. Let's not worry about whether it's associated with a real human being or not. The state legislatures across this country set up rules precisely because they want to ensure that the #1 reason that Americans say they don't vote is that their vote won't make a difference, their vote won't be counted. We absolutely want a system of integrity. When the U.S. Postal Service tells us that they're not able to competently handle this process, that ought to have been something that some of these agitators that want these changes, they should have been working on this in January.
All right, well, Postal Service, I do think they think that they can handle it, but their critics don't think so, so we'll see what we get from them. Steph, you're up first next. We're going to go overseas, panel, as we take a deeper dive into Iran's nuclear ambitions and what it means for all of our foreign policy from Ukraine to Israel and beyond. That's next.